Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today at the Global Reading Network for our workshop on the Enabling Writers Program. Before we move on to introducing the speakers, I wanted to provide you a little background about this initiative. The Enabling Writers Workshop Program is funded by the All Children Reading a Grand Challenge for Development partners, which include USAID, World Vision, and the Australian government, and is supported by University Research Company and still leads through training, mentoring, and monitoring processes. The workshop program was officially launched in November 2016. It was conceived as a proof of concept, an effort to develop a model that would support communities in developing substantial sets of high-quality decodable and leveled books for adoption by ministries of education and use by schools in developing countries, to develop the local capacity for sustainable creation of those books beyond the scope of the funded project, and to produce a large set of quality books using the Bloom book writing software for sharing via the Global Digital Library and other online ebook access points. Our team today is going to talk a little bit about, from Nigeria today, is going to talk a bit about their experience, equipping workshop facilitators with materials, software, and processes to engage local groups of writers to work together to create book titles. And they're going to tell a bit about their experience working with Phil International's Bloom book writing software, which was the winner of ACR GCD's 2015 Enabling Writers Competition. All books are written within the local language context, and they align with specific curricular standards for literacy acquisition and content knowledge. And our teams engage local ministries in their implementation and book development. The Enabling Writers Workshop Program contributes to meeting 2 of the Global Book Alliance objectives: to produce well-written, level-appropriate mother tongue reading materials, and to expand access to content by providing open license, downloadable materials that allow sharing, electronic use, and large-scale printing. So I'm going to move on to our team member, Aristeric Limo, from the REACH team at URC, to introduce our panelists and to tell you a little bit more about their background, and we'll proceed with the program.
Thank you, Jennifer. As Jennifer mentioned, today's webinar will focus on will spotlight the Nigerian Enabling Writers Workshop Program, responsible for creating decodable and export books in the Hausa language. So today we have 4 presenters, but we will have 3 presenters online. Our first presenter is Abdul Iman, who is actually the Nigeria Enabling Writers Project Manager, but also he works at the Atiku Center and holding the position of Administrator of Grants and the Contracts. Abdul Iman brings over 20 years of project design and implementation experience, as well as a country office leadership for International Judging. Our second presenter is Grace Malui. Dr. Grace Malui is a lecturer at the American University of Nigeria, where she teaches writing and coordinates literacy-related community development service learning courses. She serves as curriculum and pedagogy lead on Enabling Writers Project in Nigeria. Dr. Grace and Abdul Iman, you are welcome for this webinar.
Thank you.
Another presenter, our third presenter will be Professor Salis Ahmed Yakasai. Professor Salis Yakasai is a lecturer in the Department of Nigerian Languages at the Usman Dan Fodio University, and is currently the National Vice President of the Nigerian Institute of Translators and Interpreters. Our fourth presentation will be coming from Dr. Gaba Gandu. He is a NEDIC representative. NEDIC is Nigerian Educational Research Development Council, and Dr. Gandu is the Deputy Director, Language Research and Development and the focal person in reading initiative and policy framework. He will not be available online with us, but his presentation will be presented by Professor Salus on behalf of him. So we will start hearing from Abdul-Liman, then to Dr. Grace, then Professor Salus. So Abdul-Liman, please, you are welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone online and on phone. All right, we are delighted to be able to participate in this webinar. The American University of Nigeria Development Mission includes providing access to education for particularly children affected by conflicts and children not able to have access to education for any other reason. So we are situated in northeastern Nigeria. Actually, the second most affected state in terms of the Boko Haram insurgency is Adamawa State, and we are situated in the capital city of Adamawa State. Prior to our engagement with USAID projects, we had been implementing a USAID technology enhanced learning program, which was a radio program that broadcasts radio sessions, radio lessons, literacy in Hausa to teach reading, literacy and numeracy for using the Hausa language. So we got this, when this opportunity came with Read to Reach competition, we were delighted to join that because already as part of university community outreach, we have been working with Dr. Grace and her team, and our students have been developing actually supplementary readers in Hausa and another language here called Fufude that we have been using in other programs that we run, but also sharing with schools that are close, what we call host community primary schools. We've been using it to help them. So when this opportunity came, to the natural match for our own vision and mission, and therefore we applied to be the key implementer to develop 200 readers, decodable readers, leveled readers in Hausa language as the primary deliverable for the engagement we have with URC. Over the course of the initially 9 months, it's stretched to more than 9 months because of I guess contractual issues. But we're delighted that as at October, end of October, the first batch of all the books, all 200 readers, were presented to the federal government of Nigeria, represented by the Federal Ministry of Education, who were in attendance, the Nigerian Educational Research Development Center, which is the body mandated to approve all curriculum materials in Nigeria, as well as USAID Nigeria and other partners who work with us. The singular thing I wanted to mention here in terms of something we did very, very well, I would say, beyond developing the books, is the strategic partnership we were able to obtain working with projects, USAID projects, DFID projects, UNICEF projects, that are all of them were also doing primary education, promoting reading, and we work with NEI Plus, Northern Education Initiative, funded by USAID. We work with them to kind of complement, strategize, and leverage the resources that we have. We work with another project here called RANA, Reading Access Nigerian Activity, funded by I think it's UNICEF through DFID, also doing reading across Nigeria in Hausa language. So those two projects particularly were very, very helpful to us in terms of getting technical support for writers that joined us, in terms of getting illustrators, but also in terms of piloting and testing the books that we had developed in the Hausa-speaking areas of Nigeria that those projects operate. So I'm really delighted, and on behalf of the American University of Nigeria, I want to thank USAID in particular and URC specifically for the confidence they had in our ability to do this, and we look forward to more engagement as we promote the use of these books in primary schools in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you, man, for such a great, brief introduction. And now I welcome Dr. Grace to present the remaining part. Dr. Grace, you're welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As Dr. Liman said, we're really delighted to have been part of this project. The Nigerian experience has been fun for us. So what we're going to share will be the lessons learned from a structured, leveled, and decodable book writing program using the Bloom software. Now, when we started this project, we had a task assigned to us as per the contract that we were given to develop high-quality books in Hausa that support reading instruction. And I think the key word there is books that support reading instruction. So our target was to develop 50 decodables, and the decodable simple single-word books with short sentences that can help beginning readers to improve on their reading, and then 150 leveled books. And then those texts were grouped increasingly according to difficulty level. And the books we're supposed to develop the books in such a way as they depict the cultural context of the lives of the children, and that's why the writers were local. And then to develop the capacity of these local writers as well, to be able to use the Bloom software so that creating a kind of sustainability for the project even after the expiration of the contract, and then to secure buy-in of relevant government establishments. So that was the task we're contracted to do. And then the books are supposed to be developed in Hausa. Now, Hausa is one of the 3 major languages in Nigeria. So developing books in Hausa goes a long way in helping in advancing reading in Nigeria, since Hausa is one of the major languages in the country. So our first task on this on the project was putting together the guiding documents. Slide, yes, second. Third slide. So putting together the guiding documents. Now we require 2 major guiding documents to enable field lead to set up the Hausa Bloom, to give us a Hausa Bloom setup that can be used to produce these structured books. So our first guiding document is the Hausa phonics scope and sequence. The second guiding document we had to develop was the leveling document that used to ensure that the leveled books were according to levels of difficulty, and we needed to get sample text in Hausa that were representative of the words and then the kind of sentences that were appropriate to the level of the children. So that was our first task, and so we felt there was no need to reinventing the wheel. So what we did was to go to agencies and organizations that have worked that are also engaged in development of Hausa literacy materials to see if we can source these guiding documents. So our first outing on this project took us to the Nigerian Educational Research and Development Council. So right from the onset of the program, we got involved with stakeholders, and we went to the Nigerian Educational Research and Development Council because that's the agency that is in charge of book development and curriculum development. So we went to them to see if we can get Hausa phonics scope and sequence, and then if there were guiding documents, leveling documents, we could use to enable us give field lead for the Bloom setup. Now, our visit to NEI Plus, to NERDC, we met with the executive secretary and we shared the goal of the project with them. They were excited about it, and so they put us in contact with the Northern Education Initiative Plus because they've worked with them, and they were in the process. They had developed course materials for Hausa, but specifically textbooks. And then we were put in contact again with Reading and Numeracy Activity Rana, which is a UNICEF project implemented by FHI 360. So we had a meeting with this, at the onset of the project, we had a meeting with these 3 bodies, NERDC, Northern Education Initiative Plus, and Reading and Numeracy Activity in Abuja. And then from our interaction, we were able to come up with these guiding documents that we needed. So the Hausa phonics scope and sequence that we used in developing our materials were adapted from the scope and sequence that is used in any I+ Hausa textbooks. The leveling document was an adaptation of samples sent to us by URC, plus the leveling document, bits of information in the NEI+ textbook that kind of suggests some kind of leveling. And so these things were adapted to produce the leveling document that was used on this project. And then the sample text. For sample text, AUN had been, as Liman said, AUN has been engaged in developing Hausa literacy materials since 2012, and under the project called TELA. And then we used those materials. We took samples from those materials, and then samples from NEI+ textbooks, and then the read-aloud storybooks that were produced by Rana. So that was how we were able to generate the sample texts that were appropriate to the level of required for us to write the books for grade 1 and 2 on the EW project. Now, our next task, when we had assembled the guiding documents and sent them to the field lead to give us the Bloom's, to set up Bloom to be used for developing the materials, our next task was to assemble our writers. So what we did with assembling of our writers was to get writers that were already engaged in developing Hausa early grade reading materials. And so we invited writers that had worked with NEI+ in developing their Hausa literacy materials, and then we worked with also writers who had worked with on Rana, reading and numeracy activity, because they had developed read-aloud text in Hausa, and so we invited the writers from these two projects. We also invited Hausa language teachers who are trainers of primary and secondary school teachers in the colleges of education. We also invited writers who work with children in community library. We also invited primary school teachers who had participated in our own TELA project, and so have been engaged in helping children develop literacy and numeracy. And then as part of the writing team, NERDC sent us 2 Hausa language consultants. And so this was how we assembled the writers that came in for our first writing workshop. So when we had assembled our writers, we had our first writing workshop. In total, to develop the 200 books, we had in total 3 workshops. 3 writing workshops. The first was held in February, the second was held in March, and the third was held in May. Now the first writing workshop was a 5-day workshop, Monday to Friday, and we invited 37 writers. We had 3 people who came in as observers. Now that writing workshop lasted 5 days, and we're able to write 116 books. And then, but out of those books, pre-review we had 116. Post-review we ended up with 95 books, and because we had to discard 21 books. And I think the reason behind that was the fact that this writing workshop, we did many things in this workshop, because that was the workshop that we used to lay the foundation in terms of what is early grade reading. We had to acquaint the writers with early grade reading, what are labeled books, what are decodable books, and then they had to learn how to use Bloom. So there were a lot of things happening in that workshop. And then we also had the number of writers that we had. It was from that first workshop we realized 37 writers for one writing trainer was a bit large. So our subsequent workshops, we kind of cut down on that number. So the lesson we learned from that one workshop, from that first workshop, was that there was a need to conference regularly with the writers if we needed to produce books that would meet set standards. And then we also needed to review with the writers the story structure so that they get an understanding of the fact that a story has to have some kind of exposition, a high point, and then some kind of resolution of an issue. So those are lessons we learned from the first workshop, and then we implemented that in the second workshop. And we also learned that from the workshop we realized books that were written in pairs or groups tended to be better than books that writers wrote on their own. So when we had our second and third workshop, we made sure that these lessons learned helped us to produce better books. So our second workshop, so this was the focus of the first workshop, and so many things were happening. There was training on Bloom, there was enlightening them on decodable books, there was guiding them on how to even type decodable and level books on Bloom, making them understand the leveling and guiding documents. So a lot of things happened in that first workshop, although we had a large number of books, but the quality, as I said, 21 was a large number to discard. So our second workshop, we invited 10 writers. So we moved from 37, limited it to 10 writers. And we selected our 10 writers based on the quality of books that were written in the first workshop. So these 10 writers were the writers and co-authors of the 95 books that were selected. And at this workshop, what we focused on was one, reviewing some of the books from workshop 1. We reviewed some of the books from the first workshop, and then we tried to incorporate topics from core curricular subjects that were not adequately addressed in the first workshop, because as part of our deliverables, we had to produce informational text as well as narrative text. So first workshop, we didn't focus on informational text. So we focused on that in workshop 2, and then there were some themes that were not adequately addressed in workshop 1, like peace, conflict resolution, responsibility, local folktales. So these were themes that we focused on in the second workshop. Now our third workshop had even a smaller number of writers, and this workshop was just 3 days because we had less than 40 books to meet our target. So we invited 6 writers, and it ran for 3 days. And at that workshop, we were able to develop 38 leveled books. So, and we focused also on themes that were not sufficiently addressed from previous workshops. So our focus were topics from co-curricular subjects, so more of informational text, and then writing stories that were based on local folk tales. So that was the focus of workshop 3. Now, so we organized the activities because, as I said, after our first workshop, we realized working in pairs and then organizing the writers so that we can have high-quality books was key, and the ability to conference with them. So what we did with this workshop, we had task sheets for every writing session, and our task sheets were designed in such a way that we specified what theme we want the writers to work on, or what curriculum content we wanted them to write on. So we put them in groups and we say, okay, you write a story that on the theme of maybe peaceful coexistence, and you're writing that story for level 4. Or you write a story that's on the theme of conflict resolution, and you're writing that story for level 3. Or we give them a textbook, maybe a basic science technology textbook, maybe book 2, and we say pick a topic from the textbook and write a leveled book for level 4, level 3, or level 2, depending on, because we wanted to make sure we had storybooks balanced across all the levels. So we assigned specific tasks to the writers, and by so doing, we're able to conference with them and make sure that the materials, the books being developed were of high quality and met the standards that had been set. So at the end of every workshop, we had a rigorous review for quality assurance, review of the books for quality assurance. So we did quality assurance review at 3 stages. The first stage of our quality assurance review was done by our monitoring and evaluation team. And then that team consisted of the monitoring and evaluation lead, who worked with a Hausa native speaker. And the Hausa native speaker is an intern with our project office. So our M&E lead worked closely with the Hausa native speakers to review for the first stage in review of the books written at every workshop. Now they worked with hard copies, so at the end of the workshop we printed the books that were written, and then the M&E lead worked with the Hausa native speaker to review the books, and basically they worked on the forms given to us as part of the contract to be filled by the writers. So we reviewed, we had checklists to review in terms of content, in terms of context, in terms of equity, in terms of gender and inclusion focuses. So some of those elements that were included in our contract, those were the things that the M&E team focused on in the first stage of quality assurance review. Our second stage of quality assurance review is the writer-trainer review. Now, the writer-trainer review and the editing was led by the writing trainer and pedagogy lead. For books written in the first workshop, the books were brought to the second workshop, and then the writers helped in reviewing those books as they were writing the books for the second workshop. And this was done mostly on Bloom, because the writers reviewed hard copy, but the writing trainer and the EW project staff did the review on Bloom, so that we're revising the books on Bloom. Now, the main focus of this revision was to follow up on things that were highlighted by the M&E review, to carry out level checks. So we had to make sure the sentences, the number of words were in accordance with the guidelines for that particular level on Bloom. And then we had to make sure that narrative and non-fiction organization structure was being followed in the books. And then we looked at content quality in terms of if it's a story. Most of the word we normally use is a flat story. That's a story that just flat. There is no high point in it. There is no resolution in it. So we check that. And then we check for picture and page layout to make sure picture and page layout is balanced. And then we edited for basic errors of mechanics, the ones that we could easily see, like full stop and punctuation. Those were things that we were able to edit. So the edition of quality review, which is by the Hausa language expert. Now, a Hausa language expert, one of whom is Professor Salisu Yakase, who will be speaking later on. We had two of them, Professor Salisu Yakase and Professor Yelwa. They were our Hausa language expert on this project. Both were recommended to us by the Nigerian Education Research and Development Council because of their expertise in terms of literacy and development materials, specifically in Hausa, and the fact that we needed to make sure that the Hausa used in the books was the standard Hausa that could cut across any region in Nigeria, and they were the best people to do that. So they reviewed hard copies, and those hard copies were sent to them, and they edited errors in mechanics, ensure that the Hausa used was acceptable standard Hausa in terms of structure and vocabulary. So that's how our book development activities went, from assembling of our writers, the workshop, and then at the end of the workshop we did the review. So these are the lessons we learned from that, from the activities. The need to maintain a 10 or less writer ratio for one writing trainer is important if the quality of book development is to be enhanced. Secondly, we realized that conferencing with writers during the writing process and reviewing the books with writers soon after the task is completed ensures the books meet set standards. So these are lessons we learned in the first workshop, and we implemented them in our subsequent workshops. And then in our first workshop, we had Bloom and the Hausa share or the Hausa setup on flash drives, and we gave each participant a prepared flash drive so that it made it easy to install the Bloom software on the laptops of our writers without any risk of computer virus transfer. We also realized that we needed a systematic review process to ensure book quality, and that was why we did these 3 stages of review: M&E review, the writer-trainer review, and then the Hausa language expert review. So we went through all those 3 stages for each book that was written. And we also realized that some of the writers needed refresher lessons on elements of a good story so that we could boost the quality of the narratives that were written on the project. Now, after when we had written our 200 books, the next stage for us was the field testing. So the field testing took place between the 10th and the 28th of July 2017, but it was preceded by a field test training and distribution of the field testing kit. So that was done. We had a one-day training for the teachers that were going to participate in the field testing. So we had 20 teachers and 2 directors of quality assurance from 2 states. The states we used for the field testing are Sokoto and Bauchi states. We did field testing in these 2 states for the reason that we needed to do field testing in places where the teachers were already familiar with teaching literacy in Hausa, and we're also familiar with the basic steps in terms of phonics, Hausa phonics, and we're also familiar with leveled materials. So we chose schools that were already in partnership with NEI Plus, which is the Northern Education Initiative. So we chose 5 schools. The sample, we took 25% of our sample, which were 50 books, and this is the distribution, decodables and levels chosen proportionally so that we could make sure that we were testing samples across levels. Now, the purpose of the field testing was to find out whether the levels of text are appropriate for the students they were written for. We needed also the teachers' opinions about the books. We also needed people's opinions about the books and whether the books were interesting and engaging. And then the field testing was also to help us with the next stage of revision, so that to enhance the quality and make sure that the input from teachers and pupils were taken care of when the final version of the books are released. Now, the field testing process went something like this. These are regulations given to us in the documents supplied by URC. So the teachers used 1 book for 2 days. They had to go through the process of, they introduce the books to the students, and they do it first and foremost as a read aloud. So they read aloud the books to the students. So these were things we trained them on. We trained them on the procedure for the field testing, and so they implemented that as per the procedure that was given to them. So read aloud first, then use the books following your regular classroom instructions. And we had a discussion with them regarding what do they normally do if they were reading, if they are reading a story in class. And we told them to do just exactly that with the books that we give them. And then the last part of the training was to make sure that they gave the children the opportunity to do independent reading of the books. So this was followed because each teacher had 5 different titles, and the teacher had to go through the process for each of the 5 books. And at the end of each book, the teacher needed to complete a data form that was included in the pack that was given to them at the end of the field training. Now, our field test monitoring was done by the directors of quality assurance. These are government officials who are in charge of quality assurance in the State Universal Basic Education Board. The State Universal Basic Education Board is the agency in charge of basic education in the state. So the quality assurance of directors are the ones that ensure quality in terms of curriculum materials, in terms of instruction in their schools. So they came to our field test training, and so they were the ones that served on the field for us as independent observers. And then our M&E team also monitored all schools and then collected the forms that were completed by the independent observers, and also did followed up in 25% of the schools. So they observed teachers using the field test books during instruction. They also interviewed teachers about the books tested, and then did a focused group interview for the students to get the opinion of the students. Now the feedback from the students showed that the children liked all the books that were field tested. We didn't get any adverse report on any specific book. Now, what the report showed us was that each child would have liked to have a copy of the book during the lesson. But as per the instructions in the given to us in the document, we printed only 10 copies of each title for the children. So 10 copies of a title was not sufficient for all the children that in the class where the field testing was going on. So we had that feedback. And then we also noticed that children had a preference for books with animal characters. From the feedback, we also found out that some words were not familiar to the children, and we realized that this was due to the fact that there are several varieties of Hausa, and the variety that was edited in our book is the standard variety. So somewhere in Bauchi, some words might be unfamiliar because it's a different variety of Hausa. So for our books, we use the standard Hausa variety. And then we found out that some illustration did not support the children to enable them comprehend the text. So those were observations from the students. Now, these are the lessons we learned from the field testing. We found out that the involvement of the directors of quality assurance from the State Universal Basic Education of the 2 states that participated in our field testing had affected greatly the success of our field testing, because the directors of quality assurance are the bosses of these teachers, and so the fact that these people were at the field test training with the teachers helps to get a full commitment from the teachers that were involved in the field testing. It also gave the teachers the cooperation of their head teachers, because the head teachers were not invited to the field testing training. But since the director of quality assurance was there, and the director of quality assurance is also the boss of the head teacher, we found out that there was cooperation from the head teachers as well. And then the fact that the director of quality assurance, who is the person in charge of curriculum and material development and quality in the State Universal Basic Education Board, got the board interested in the work of the Enabling Writers Project. And it also ensured that we had someone who was monitoring daily the activities that was going on the field during the field testing process. Now, one thing we learned also was the fact that there is this desire by these students to get hard copy of books to read, to use for independent reading. And so the need to produce these books for use by the children was something we learned from the field testing. Now, so after the field testing, one of the purposes of the field testing was to get input for review of the books that were written. So the main area of review that came about from the field testing had to do with illustration. So one of the feedback was the fact that some of the pictures were not supporting comprehension on some pages. So we had to review illustration in 2 ways. We review illustration by combining 2 or more still images to support the content. And then we partnered with a stakeholder to provide a complete illustration of 25 of our 50 decodable. So we have 25 decodables that are illustrated not with still images, but by an illustrator that gave us culturally appropriate illustrations that supported the actions that were going on each page. So this is a sample of the illustration review that we did. Like, what it means is Nana, Kichimasa, that is Nana, eat something. So the picture with the girl and the woman separate is the best that we could get from still illustration. So even to get that picture, we needed to combine two still images to get something that suggests that there is a girl and there is something to be eaten. But with the illustration made by our stakeholder, you could see the girl and you could see her eating something on a plate. So that was supported comprehension more than the picture on the, is it the left or the right? The picture with the two separate pictures. Okay. Now, so after our field review, after our field testing, we reviewed our materials. As I said, our main focus of review was illustration. So after the review, we produced our first batch of all 200 books, and we called a stakeholder meeting to adopt the books. And that was held on the 18th of October. We had the following agencies in attendance. The highest body in charge of education in Nigeria sent a representative. Then we had the chief executive of the Nigerian Education Research Council, Research Development Council in attendance in person. We had the highest, the chief executive of the Ministry of Education in Sokoto State, who is the commissioner, was in attendance. And then we had the heads of the 3 basic education boards of Sokoto, Bauchi, and Adamawa states in attendance. And the USAID was represented, British Council was represented, and then our 2 partnering agencies from the RANA project and from the Northern Education Initiative Plus were also in attendance. So the lessons learned from the project is the fact that we started off by getting in touch with the primary agency in charge of curriculum development and book development. And I think that kind of got us involved with the government agencies right from the start of the project. And that has helped, because we started with them, we've maintained that relationship up to the end of the project. And that is why we're having, even for this presentation, a representative from NERDC sending in their response to this project. So that's something that we have learned. Involving relevant government agencies from the start of the project is key to material acceptance. And not just material acceptance, but even guidance on the direction to go with the project, because we got guidance from NERDC in terms of who to contact when we're looking for a specific document. We also realized that collaboration with agencies and organizations involved in similar projects saves time and then improves your product, because there will be no need for you to reinvent something that is already in existence. And that was why we found we didn't have to do too much work on coming up with the phonic scope and sequence. We just used what was available that is being used by NEI Plus. So the challenges, I think one of the challenges with the project is writing is something that comes from inspiration. And so at a certain point in the workshops, we tend to see that inspiration is waning, especially towards the end of the day, or maybe on the for a 5-day workshop, maybe on the 3rd or 4th day, you find out that the stories are not coming out, or books are not coming out the way you want them to come out. So that's a challenge. And then another challenge we encountered was working on the same Bloom folder for the review and quality assurance process. Because if you're not working on the same Bloom folder, there's a tendency that a book has been reviewed in one folder and it's unreviewed in another folder. So there's the need to make sure that you're working on the same folder so that you don't have different versions of the book in different places. So that was a challenge as well. And then we had a challenge with writers who had mastered Bloom and were playing around with it. And so when we copied their their Bloom folder for us to do the review, find out that they've made the pages uneditable, and so we have to kind of rewrite the books because we can't edit on their pages. So our recommendations for similar future projects is to find ways of increasing motivation. And what has worked for us is planning the writing tasks, having this writing task sheets turned out to be really, really useful, and then specifying themes, and then giving them the scenario that you want to be developed in the story. So there was a lot of discussion. Once a task sheet is given to the writers, what we did was to talk about the theme, talk about possible scenarios. So all these things helped in increasing motivation. And then, as I said, books written in groups or pairs were better than, for us, we found they were better than books written in groups. So, because I think exchanging of ideas helps to increase motivation and inspiration. Another thing we did was to punctuate writing sessions with 10 to 15 minutes of fun activities. So we had the brain teasers were something that kind of refreshed our writers when we see that motivation and inspiration was waning. And then what we did also was to have one computer designated for review with a hard drive, so that if a project staff reviewed a book and then the writing trainer needed to see that the review was made, all we needed to do was to get the hard drive or to work on that same computer. So this ensured that we didn't have revisions done in different places, and then we lose track of which is the revised version and so on. So those things helped us to be able to overcome some of the challenges that were mentioned. Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Grace and Liman, for your wonderful presentation. As I mentioned before, before we proceed with another presentation, we will have a few questions from participants to Dr. Grace and Liman. And Grace, if we can go to the question and answers box to see what questions have come from into there. I can see here we have one question from Maxine asking how was tone in terms of vowel, that is, vowel have different tones taken into account when determining the vowel difficulty of a book, or is it tone quite predictable and therefore not problematic?
What we did with tone and in terms of difficulty level was basically we're more concerned with the fact that the words met our criteria in terms of syllables, and so tone, different tones in Hausa didn't pose too much concern for us. What we tried to do was not to have a word that can be pronounced in two different ways within the same sentence and on the same page. So that was what we tried to do, so that we don't have a word spelled the same way, pronounced differently due to tone on the same page for the learners. So we took care of that so that the students are not confused in terms of this word is spelled the same way, but it's pronounced differently.
Okay. There is another question there. It's asking, of course, they are saying thank you for your presentation, Dr. Margui. How did you manage pay or contracts for the writers?
I think I'll allow the grant administrator to answer that.
Well, I think the kind of advantage we have is we have a series of, we're a university, so we have access to a lot of students, both undergraduate and graduate, and the university systems allows for what we call work study, which pays small stipends to students. But also, we take in a lot of volunteers for many of our projects who are outside the university. So we have a predetermined rate, which was really very cost-effective for us in terms of be paying for time. But also, one last bit was almost, I would say, almost everybody who came to do the writing did not require a pay. What we did was we pay a stipend and cover their travel and provided accommodation. So we just incentivized them, but we didn't pay like a salary or a contract really, except for the core staff.
Thank you, Liman, for such a brief answer. That question asks, can you give more background on the education situation of minorities of Nigeria? Are they educated in the mother tongue at all? Are the children going to use these books at home or in school?
Okay, let me answer the question that talked about how long was the second workshop. The second workshop was also 5 days. So we had a first workshop that was 5 days, a second workshop 5 days, so the third workshop that was 3 days. Now regarding the background on the educational situation of minorities in Nigeria, I'm not sure what the person means by minorities, but what happens in this, Nigeria has an educational language policy, and the language policy is that children are taught in the first 3 years of the primary school using the mother tongue or the language of wider communication as the medium of instruction. Now, when we what we did with these materials is we field tested them in 2 states where Hausa literacy is actually being advanced, and those states are Bauchi and Sokoto states. So for those schools, for these states where Hausa literacy is being advanced, we find out that these children are going to use these books in school, and then if we're able to get them copies, they can use them at home for independent reading as well.
Thank you. Can you proceed with another question, or should I read?
Okay, there's a question that says, did you include comprehension questions in the books? If not, why not? Now, when we were developing the books, I think that was something we talked about during the training, when URC was training us, whether there was a need to include comprehension questions in the books, and it was agreed we should just leave that, we should leave out comprehension questions and then allow the teachers to use the books the best way they can, using it according to their classroom, their already existing classroom practice.
Okay. Proceed.
There's a question from Richard Jones that it would be interesting to see the leveling document and Hausa phonics and sequence. Is it possible for you to share this? So I don't know whether Limo should answer that.
Yeah, it's our property with that.
Okay.
You need to respond.
I will share in terms of the materials are available. If anyone wants, I'm sure we can share that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure we can share the phonic sequence and then the leveling document, the Hausa leveling document. Yes, we can.
It's not available.
And then which Creative Commons did we use? We used Creative Commons 4.0 for the books having licensed under Creative Commons 4.0. And someone is asking if we can have the presentation to download.
Yes, that will be available. I can answer that. That will be available after the end of this webinar. Maybe next 2 days, it will be ready in GRN website.
Okay. So I think that answers also the next question. Are the stories available electronically? So we're in the process of getting that available. I don't know whether Limo, you'll answer that.
Yes, I can. They will be available electronically, and they will be available in the Global Digital Library and also Bloom Library. But also we are coordinating with other online libraries to see if they can also upload them in the library. So they will be available globally.
Okay. Now we have a question that says, how do you think about Bloom software? Any improvement you think Bloom software can do? In terms of the purpose that we used Bloom for in developing these Hausa materials, making sure that they are decodable, meeting the decodable level and meeting the levels criteria, the Bloom software has worked excellently well in that. I think the only improvement might be illustrations, and then.
Yes. So,
okay.
Dr. Grace.
And then I think that we have another point regarding the Bloom, the issue of collaboration when authors want to work on the same book. Yeah, so that's something that could be improved upon.
So thank you very much, Dr. Grace, for answering those questions. The questions which will not be answered online here will be posted in the GRI's website with their answers. So let me take this opportunity to welcome Professor Salus to do his presentation. And as I mentioned before, Professor Salus will do two presentations. One talking about his own experience working with enabling writers since he was a consultant appointed by NEDIC. And also he will do another presentation from NEDIC on behalf of the NEDIC director because he could not join us online today. Professor Salus, please, you are welcome.
I'll be talking about two things. One, the lessons learned from the implementation process, and then the recommendations for application. But before then, I would like to say something very little as a consultant of this program. As a consultant, my work includes reviewing and editing of the decodable and label storybooks. When we talk about reviewing and editing, it involves checking the language, orthography, sentence construction, gender, and the number. These are very, very important. Whenever we want to talk about standard language, we take into cognizance these issues we raise. The language will make sure that it complies, with the standard. Orthography also very, very important. We check the spelling, word divisions, and so on and so forth. And it also entails the sentence construction that has to, because in Hausa language, it involves the use of gender and number, whenever you are talking, whatever you're talking about is living or non-living things. The question of gender and number must have to be there. So this was the main task that we did as far as the reviewing and editing are concerned. Now, to cover the batch of the books, we did them in 3 batches. Batch 1 contains 60 decodable and label story books. They were reviewed and edited as per the outline issues under language, orthography, sentence construction, gender, and number. Batch 2 contains 70 decodable and label story books. They were reviewed and edited. And thirdly, 77 decodable and label story books were reviewed and edited. So collectively, the total number of the books which were reviewed and edited were based on the batches. The first batch was done. When they finish, they send it to us. We go through and check the language, orthography, sentence construction, gender, and the number. And subsequently, batch 2 and batch 3 up to the end. Now, moving to the question of lesson plan for the implementation process. Here, there are 2 important issues there. One is the little implementation time. That is to say the timing is too short. One would have preferred adequate time, even though we all know that whenever we have work of this nature, we used to have a time frame within which the work must have to be done or accomplished. But certainly, the implementation time is really very, very little. Perhaps in the future, we may need more timing to make sure that everything has been covered. Secondly, it is a question of inadequate training on the software. We remember that the Bloom was something very new for all of us. I remember we participated in the 3 stages. First of all, we were also part of the participants who were taught how to work on the Bloom software. At this level, we were acquainted, with the mechanics of the Bloom. And then at that level, that was during the first workshop. The second and the third workshop, we were busy editing the work that has already been done. So the Bloom was entirely new to us. It was very, very interesting. And it was an interesting experience. But the training was not really adequate. Also in that case, one would have really preferred adequate training time for us to master the software. Perhaps the non-adequate of the timing of the training, that was really what really caused some of the little mistakes that Grace has indicated, in our presentations. But on the whole, the software was very, very interesting, and the experience was really interesting. Now, coming to the recommendations for applications of the enabling writing. Number one, there is a need for building closer synergy with wider government offices in charge of basic education, like the State Universal Basic Education Board, SUBEC, and the National Council for Colleges of Education, NCCE. That is to say, although at a certain point they were really involved, but there is a need, for them to be fully involved, especially bearing in mind the role they play as far as education is concerned as a whole, in the country. It is very, very important, especially when we consider UBEC at the national level and SUPEB at the state level. It is very, very important to have, that closer synergy so that subsequently any other thing that will have to be done, can be done collectively. Secondly, the implementation should include a pilot phase where interaction of children with the Bloom books is tested, and reviewed. It is very, very important, bearing in mind that even those who participate in the project have to be trained on how the software was to be used. When coming to the students, they have no idea. So I think it's very, very important, having that interaction with the children to see how actually the books are tested, and reviewed. Thirdly, the universities, especially which the outcome of the projects are going to utilize, could have been be linked with the more, in the sense that most of them they can be involved in the reading program, especially bearing in mind the role the faculties of education play as facilitators and coordinators of reading centers. That is to say, in some of these universities we have faculties of education whose role, has to do with facilitations and coordination. So one would have thought they can be involved, they can be linked to the whole program, so that, some of the little hitches we might have experienced in the project, can be handled, in the future. Number four, the national policy on education allows children to learn through language of environment. This was changed later to be learning through child's mother tongue. Therefore, any country, for example, that has a similar policy to Nigeria can easily adapt this particular project. The only thing is that they have to change from one language, to another, because every country must have different languages. In Nigeria, for example, we have, over 520 languages. And therefore, if any country wants to replicate this particular project, then certainly it can be done, bearing in mind, the modalities that have already been taken. The only thing is that, the languages must have to be substituted, because every country has its own languages. Lastly, in northern Nigeria, there are over at least 3 key languages. The national policy on education allows, like I said, children to learn through the medium of each other. So, for example, the USAID should have at least extended this particular project to be involved with other languages like Fulfulde and Kanuri languages. These are very, very important languages which can be found or which are found within the same environment with Hausa. If this is done, that is to say, the purpose will really be achieved, and then a large area or number can be covered, especially bearing in mind the Fulfulde language and the Kanuri language also, happen to have a very close relationship, with Hausa. Lastly, the planned sustainability strategies of this particular project should have include a kind of memorandum of understanding at the onset. That is to say, those bigger organizations, the Ministry of Education, the NERDC, and so on and so forth, where we have a memorandum of understanding that will easily facilitate at any given time anything that will really come, can just be handled collectively instead of allowing, AUM, for example, to handle it alone. Although the project was entirely supposed to have been handled, but then notwithstanding, if we want to a kind of plan of sustainability strategies where we have the memorandum of understanding, that will really help, in facilitating whatever we really want to do. Because together we can be able to handle the project, successfully. On the whole, it was a huge success. But notwithstanding some of these observations, if they can be handled, I'm sure subsequently any project of this nature that will come will really make a huge success. And if by way of extending these languages like Kanuri or Fulfulde, or this very one that has already been done, will be extended, to cater for some of the observations we mentioned in the presentation of Dr. Grace. I think that will really be very, very interesting. Thank you very much. This is as far as my own observation in the basic, in the 3 areas that I have participated. That is number 1, at the training level. Secondly, as a consultant, the kind of role that I have played. And thirdly, at the presentation level. At the presentation level, like Dr. Grace has mentioned, I was part and parcel, I was there, and then the presentation was made. All the key, all the stakeholders, the Federal Ministry of Education, the NERDC, and all what have you were also present, and then the work was presented. And then some were anxiously waiting for permission to be given, like the commissioners from the Ministry of Education, to start that particular thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Alisu, for your feedback. Yeah. And now you have another role to play to present on behalf of NEDIC Director.
Plans from the structured level and decodable book writing program using BLIM software, the Enabling Writers Workshop experience in Nigeria. Response from NERDC. The response of the NERDC, so that is to say, it has to do with the policy issues, and certainly it is very, very important that we get them to respond. Now, talking about NERDC is a federal agency in charge of the following functions: curriculum development, book development, language development, and educational research, and other things. It is engaged in many educational activities such as policy matters, best practices, innovations in Nigeria. It performs several regulatory and quality assurance duties and responsibilities. Therefore, the role of NERDC as a gateway to innovation and partner to development initiatives. NERDC's partnership in Hausa EW project started driven and active because of derivable benefits to education, especially the reading initiative that is recording some giants and creating impact. That is to say, NERDC is appreciating being involved in part and parcel of this particular project. Now, the development of 200 levels and decodable EW project using the Bloom software is a success story, and as such must be sustained and scaled up. This can be achieved through the following. 1, mass produce of the books and be made easily accessible to learners, especially for reading and other lessons in both urban, rural, and other difficult to reach areas. I think this is very, very important. Although the target, was 200, I'm sure more and more can be produced, and then we can be able to reach all the nooks and corners of the environment. Secondly, is the question of involvement of sister educational agencies, particularly the Universal Basic Education Commission, the BEP, at the federal level, to support the production, distribution of the materials in the relevant states. This is very, very important. The UBEC is at the federal level and it controls the SUBEP at the state level. Therefore, if this arrangement is made, it simply means instruction will be made to the state at the state level so that the production of these books can be made, and then the distribution can equally be handled. I remember the Commissioner of Education, Sokoto State, was anxiously asking for permission to go ahead even prior, to the permission from the UBEC. So it is very, very important. Thirdly, partnership involving NERDC, UBEC, State Universal Education Boards, participants, and development partners to build the capacity of teachers to produce more materials and use them effectively as instructional resources is very, very important. This is because the realization of the importance and usefulness of the decodable readers, literacy, and reading is of paramount importance. Number 5, so now we move to the land concern and effective means of covering the space and narrowing the gap created by shortage of depth of reading materials. That is to say, the availability of these books will really help in minimizing the kind of problem that we have been having as far as the active shortage of books is concerned. And it will really facilitate in the reading activities of the children at different levels. It also enables an opportunity to build the capacity of practitioners, strengthening the institutional capacity. So it is going to be a two-way traffic. That is to say, the opportunity building the capacity of practitioners, and at the same time strengthening the instructional capacity. So together, that will be an added advantage. Now, provided, it will also provide an opportunity for the introduction of a global best practices, and thus opening the gates more widely for Nigeria into global community of practice, and for the community knowing that it now is really happening. This is also going to be an advantage to Nigeria by the time this particular opportunity is properly utilized. So it is important and useful to replicate this EW and other reading projects in other countries. It is very, very important. Just like I said in my own comment, that it is very, very important, and it is easy for that replication to be done in other countries, provided the pattern being utilized or being done in Nigeria can be adopted. The only thing is the question of switching over to the different languages, because the languages that are found in Nigeria are not the same in other countries. So any country that we want to adopt this particular thing, it's just a question of utilizing, the criteria used by Nigeria, especially bearing in mind that in Nigeria we use the mother tongue at those levels, just like it has been explained by Grace in her presentation. However, considering the linguistic terrain and the population of Nigeria, NERDC asserts strongly that a replication of the project to cover certain identified languages domestically will be a bright and rewarding initiative. Just like I said in my own presentation, it's very, very important if, you know, the project can be extended to other languages closer. We started with Hausa now. I have suggested Kanuri and Fulfulde, and now NERDC is suggesting other languages can be identified so that the whole project can be domesticated, so that a bright and rewarding initiative, you know, with the coming of other particular languages on board. The interesting thing is that now that it has been done in the case of Hausa, so many other related languages will be anxious to be part and parcel. I'm sure by the time the project was going on, there are other languages that ought to have been involved, but then there is a limit to what can be done at a time frame and so on and so forth. So in the case of Hausa, it has already taken place, and now we are suggesting that that can be extended, you know, to other languages. And gradually, because the most important thing has already been done, it can be extended, you know, to other languages, especially bearing in mind that in Nigeria, we have over 500, you know, and 20 languages. We are not saying all the 520 must have to be covered, but gradually, you know, those closely related to Hausa can be benefited, and then eventually the whole project can be properly utilized. Well, I think that is all for the contribution or input from the NERDC. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Professor Salisu, for representing NERDC in such a wonderful way. We felt that we had Dr. Gandu with us, so thank you very much for the two presentations. And now we are going back to question and answer session. Our time was allowed for review and editing, for example, for a book.
I don't think we did timing per book as such. What we did was after every workshop, the number of books produced at that workshop, I first goes to the M&E team, and then they go through it with the going through the forms that have been filled by the writers. That took weeks actually. I think for the first no, I can't give time, but I know that the first batch of books that were given to them from the first workshop, it took about 2 weeks to get those through the M&E process, the first review, and then the same thing goes to the for the writer trainer review, and then for the Hausa expert review, the books were sent to them in their location. So I'm not able to quantify in terms of time,
yeah,
but I can say definitely.
Can I say something, Dr. Grace?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to say, just like I mentioned, you know, the review was done in batches. That is to say, you know, a certain number, when a certain number is done, then it is sent to us. You know, while we wait for the coming of other batches, and we continue to work on the first batch that was sent. That was the reason why we said initially we had 60, then 70, then another 77. Batch 1, batch 2, and batch 3. Dr. Limo, are we communicating?
Thank you, yes. Thank you for contributing.
I don't know if, yeah, so I'm not sure we can say each book took such a number of hours because we didn't quantify in terms of hours, but
if we divide, we can get it.
If we can maybe sit down and divide, we might be able to come up with something. But right now we can say this is the specific time it takes to review a book through all the 3 stages.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question here. I'm not sure if it was covered, but he's asking, were artists on site during the workshop to supply illustrations, if appropriate? No, we didn't have artists. For the EW Nigeria, we didn't invite artists on site to review
to illustrate books as they were being written. We didn't do that. We did the review after we had edited the books. After we said this is the final version of the book we want, that was when we sent for illustrations. Those that needed illustrations changed.
Okay. And there is another question to you, Dr. Grace, asking question to Dr. Grace. Can you please summarize again the 3 steps of systematic book review?
Okay. So we had 3 stages of systematic book review. The first is the monitoring and evaluation team, and their focus actually was to make sure that we were meeting the specified guidelines in terms of content, in terms of inclusion, in terms of in terms of context, content, equity, gender, inclusion, so those kind of things, and then making sure that we're following the laid down patterns in terms of information, text, and then narrative. So that was what they did. They made sure we followed specified guidelines in terms of what should be the content. Then the second stage in the review is the one that is done by the writing trainer and the project team. And what that focused on was making sure that the focus of that one was making sure that we were meeting guiding document specifications. So our sentences, according to the number of words specified, are the do we have words that are not supposed to, that are above that level? So those ones we're concerned about in terms of how far the book has met the guiding document that are appropriate to that level. In terms of if it's decodable, are we sticking to the decodable, that particular stage of the decodable? If it's a level book, is it meeting all the criteria for a level 2 book? And so that one, that's why we said that one was done on Bloom. But the first one was done on the hard copies. But when it came to the writing trainer review, that one was done in Bloom because we needed to make sure that the books were meeting the guiding guidelines set out on Bloom. And then the third one was the one that after we had done all that, we printed the books again, and that's the one that's the third stage that was sent to Professor Yakase and his colleague. And they went through what he said, orthography, sentence structure, and then making sure that the language is standard. So those are the 3 stages in the review that took place.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The time is running short of time. We still have some questions to be answered, but unfortunately, we will not be able to answer them all here. So, as I mentioned before, we will provide answers for the questions which we didn't answer online, and we will post them in a GRN website and blog for those who have asked and others to get the answers for these questions. I would like to take this time to thank you all, participants and presenters, for being part of this webinar. And we really appreciate your time because we are used to 1 hour webinar, but this was 90 minutes webinar because it had a lot of things to be covered, taking into account also that we wanted to hear the lessons learned from Nigeria, so that when we plan for another project of this kind, we know that how we navigate through it. So once again, thank you very much for attending, and we are working to bring you another webinar in December, so please stay tuned. Dr. Grace, Aduliman, Professor Salis, thank you very much, and have a good afternoon, have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Demo.
Yes, congratulations.